welcome to Stuffology. We're two old friends who sit about and talk BS, Beatles stuff, on a track-by-track basis, pretty much for the sake of it. My name is JG McQuarrie, and I'm here with my co-host, Andrew Deacon. Say hi, Andrew.
Hello.
How are you doing after our previous mammoth episode?
I'm just sitting here watching the downloads go round and round.
Well, I do love to watch them roll. They are going rather well. Thank you, everyone who's choosing to listen to this. It's been lovely to see our numbers go up a little bit. So thanks, everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah, and actually, we're recording this on the 1st of July. It probably won't go out until maybe the end of July, I think. Not that we've actually said what the episode's about, but we've just had our best month in June, and it's very, very good to see. And thank you very much. Been looking at all the different places that we've had people download, and assuming that they are downloading and also listening, it really is quite an amazing range across the planet. So thank you very much. And if I could pronounce some of the Canadian provinces where we haven't actually had anyone download an episode, then I would name and shame them. But I can't, so I won't. And we have been making charts as well, which is quite interesting. We get excited about these things, but you need to bear in mind, dear listener, that you know, all this is really is just me looking at JG on a computer screen and us talking to each other. So the fact that there are actually some people out there who not only are listening but continuing to listen, and hopefully also maybe encouraging one or two others, is brilliant. So thank you very much for sticking with us. And we've been at this nearly 2 years now, and I suspect that means there's probably about another 5 years to go.
Excellent. Well, I mean, I would go so far as to use the word heartening in terms of our listenership and downloads. It's been heartening to see. And if we have another few years ahead of us, well, who knows where the numbers will go. Upward would be generally appreciated. But before we try and talk ourselves into yet more charts, I suppose we should probably crack on and talk about the thing that we're actually meant to be talking about, which this week is Long Tall Sally. Not just a song, but indeed the entire LP. Now, we know we're doing this slight out sequence. We know it was technically released, well, not technically released, actually released before A Hard Day's Night. But that's just the kind of care and attention that I would imagine that our many listeners, both here and around the world, have come to expect from us.
Well done. I think you're overplaying your hand slightly there.
Possibly.
But there you go. Yeah, and also we're changing the format as well, and you'll find out why when you gauge our enthusiasm levels. But we're actually talking about all 4 tracks on the EP over the course of this episode, because there's an element of this feeling slightly like a throwaway product, and by that I'm talking about the EP itself, not this podcast, which of course is of the highest possible quality at all times. But there is a feeling that there were these tracks, they wanted to put something out in order to kind of keep the audience ticking over, and fine, let's put out these 4 tracks, because what we've got are 4 tracks that are recorded at various points in the Hard Day's Night album sessions. And in fact, we've got the last 2 tracks recorded in the February-March sessions, 1st of March for I Call Your Name and Long Tall Sally, and then in between, in the middle of April, they record the title track, A Hard Day's Night. Everyone's then on holiday after the film's been made, and on the 1st of June they return and they record Slow Down and Matchbox almost as the first songs on their return in order to try and fill up the rest of A Hard Day's Night. And so it's noticeable that you've got some songs that perhaps sound a little bit tired. But the other thing that I think is interesting from my point of view is that we've got lots of nods to the past and to, in a sense, you know, some classic rock. I don't mean classic rock in the 70s sense, folks, but, you know, bear in mind 1964, you know, we've got, Larry Williams, Carl Perkins and Little Richard's songs. And we've also got one of the earlier songs written by John Lennon that's already been recorded by Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas. So it's kind of harking back at a point when the Beatles really should have been looking forward. But then perhaps that's why, again, in my view, everything sounds So tired. But I've got a question for you, JG.
Ask away.
Do you like these initial rock and roll songs? In general, I mean, not just the three on here. How do you feel about the whole sort of Chuck Berry, Little Richard kind of thing?
I don't mind it, but I can't say it's something I'm passionate about. Particularly, what I tend to be more about is like individual songs rather than sort of the runs of artists. Like I'm not an Elvis fan, but I think Heartbreak Hotel is an astounding song, and you know kind of be insane to suggest otherwise. But I'm not really an Elvis fan. If I have to listen to Elvis, like a couple of the Sun sessions, that's fine. When it comes to something like Little Richard, it's the same. Like I think Tutti Frutti is a great song. You don't really have an awful lot of affection for that much else, if I'm telling the truth. So when it comes to a lot of these kind of early rock and roll songs, I'm a bit of a magpie. I'll pick and choose. I do have like a sort of 50s rock and roll playlist on my MP3 streamer of choice, but it is mostly just like magpie stuff. One track from here, one track from there, which makes coming to this EP kind of interesting. I think, given how early I call your name is, it fits in very well with the other three songs. We'll get to whether that's a good thing or not. But same question back to you. How do you find those early songs?
I mean, I find them, you know, curiosities. I think they're interesting, progression steps on the way to things where people had discovered more about the art form. Early pioneers that paved the way, but I think that they are very much things that are stuck in their era. And if you were to, point me to other sort of elements like that, I would say the same thing. So to take a music example, I think early, again, it's all about your own personal opinion. So I'm not sort of holding this up as anything even remotely definitive. But I think early punk is really naive, and I think that much like the era of songs that the Beatles were performing here, I think people are attached to them for emotional reasons, and almost then it's like liking a band when they're unpopular, and then when the band becomes popular you go off them because I was there in the early days. I think people like to be associated with the early days of something, to feel like they were there, they were in the vanguard, despite the fact that actually quality does improve. Quality of recording, quality of performance, quality of songwriting has improved, and improves throughout the next 18 months of the Beatles' life, for example. And if you want to sort of take a slightly different example, I think there are lots of people who might still hold up Robinson Crusoe as being one of the great examples of the early English language novels, but they tend to be people who haven't read it, or at least haven't read it in a long time, or maybe have only seen an adaptation of it. Because trust me on this, okay, it's crushingly dull. And actually there's a lot about the music of that sort of period, for me, the 50s, that just has that kind of naive quality to it. Some people will love that, that's great, but it doesn't excite me as much as, say, for example, what the Beatles are beginning to do. And so you might look at, say, some of those early Kinks singles and think, actually, do you know what, they rock a lot more than some of these, but without them, would they have been as good? Don't know. You've got to leave that down to people's individual taste. My preference is for the things that have come out of them, because I think in most cases they have easily surpassed them. I wouldn't say there's anything from that sort of 50s through to early 60s period where I think it's a must for this particular playlist.
That's fair enough. Yeah, it's sort of archaeology in the non-Ruttles sense, digging into these little nuggets. I think it's one of the things that makes this EP kind of such an interesting proposition, because it does really feel, I think, particularly as it wears on, like it's dredging up the past. Sorry, I seem to have tipped my hand there. Like it's dredging up the past for a band that, even given that this predates Hard Day's Night, but a band who have already moved so far beyond this. And yet, Long Tall Sally is going to kick around until Candlestick Park in '66. So, there's something to be dug into there. But I think we probably preambled enough. We could probably actually talk about the songs themselves now. Oh, great. So, well, I'm not an.
So let's take them in order.
Yeah, that's the way. That's the way to do it. All right, go on then. Long Tall Sally.
Yeah, okay. I, in a previous episode, have been sort of reasonably critical about McCartney's screeching. When he screeches, it kind of jars with me. Top of my head, I can't remember the song, but it's fine. But actually, I think his voice in this is by far the best thing for me. I think he really hits it, and you sort of get a sense that he's enjoying himself, and that's fine. It allows him to show off, and I suppose it does allow others in the band to show off as well, because by heck, this song goes so quickly. I don't know how on earth it even makes it to 2 minutes, because you're onto the second guitar solo by about 65 seconds. There really isn't much to this song at all. And then you just have to go back to the start. Let's go through it again. Which I suppose is the other thing, of course, with some of these early songs. There isn't that development. It's all about the feel and the groove, and the energy. And for me, that's okay, but it starts to what was it, your word, wear, fairly quickly, and even a short song can then start to feel quite long. However, I'm sure live it was a real proposition and got everyone going.
I'm going to try and find a positive thing to say about each of these 4 tracks. And the positive thing I'm going to say about Long Tall Sally is agreeing with what you said, which is, I think McCartney's vocal on it is absolutely magnificent. That sounds lazy, but it's so true. It's such a good vocal performance. It's very hard to listen to that and not kind of get swept up in it. He really can deliver those moments. And yeah, like you said, I'm sure live it was an absolutely great way of ending the set. I'm sure that's absolutely true. What works as a live number doesn't always necessarily translate onto vinyl, I think it's fair to say. But honestly, of the 4 songs that we're talking about in this episode, I think Long Tall Sally is probably the best of them. I quite like the idea of retitling the Long Tall Sally EP the George Harrison Can't Nail a Guitar Solo variations, because all 4 of them wobble left, right, and center. But at least in this one, there's a sense it's meant to, and it's pretty good. Everybody feels like they are trying to up their game. The problem is that you can feel them trying to up their game, whereas as in general, and particularly in the album that we've just finished talking about, you don't need to feel it, they just are. And that's kind of the qualitative difference. You can tell they're having to work to put in the energy here. McCartney pulls it off effortlessly as far as the vocal is concerned. The backing band, if I may refer to the rest of them that way, are doing their best, but they kind of get away with it on Long Tall Sally, and then for the remaining 3 tracks, it becomes sort of diminishing returns.
Yeah, absolutely. And just sort of looking at McDonald talking about it, he seems to sort of suggest the same. Talks about McCartney's mock hysterical vocal driving the track with blistering power. And I just sort of had this thought as well. I know I talk quite a bit about lyrics, and lyrics not really being important, but they are, they tell a story, don't they? Long Tall Sally, she's built for speed. She got everything that Uncle John need, oh baby. Having me some fun tonight. We get Baldhead Sally. Well, I saw Uncle John and Baldhead Sally. He saw Aunt Mary coming and he ducked in the back alley. Oh, baby. Oh, yeah, having some fun tonight. It's a little bit on the brazen side, So it's another one of those where, funnily enough, I'd not really bothered about the lyrics that much. And now that I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, I kind of wish I hadn't bothered. But there does seem to be something, and we'll come on to this when we talk about Slow Down and Larry Williams. There does seem to be this penchant with some of these kind of early rock and roll lyrics to tell a story, to have the name of a character in the song title, and to tell a story, and particularly, I suppose, about some women. So it's yeah, I think it's funny, but I also think it's weird. I mean, you mentioned the fact that it was in the Beatles' live repertoire, right into '66. Once they'd gone in completely different directions. Do you know whereabouts they would have it in the set list? Because it sounds to me like a bit of a closer.
It is. It's a set list closer.
I was thinking that, but the lyrics say, we're going to have some fun tonight. It sort of feels a little bit like it should be at the start, like an introduction, and then you can sort of imagine that McCartney would sort of put it in the early part of a set now and go, well, that song's all about having fun. Let's hope we have some fun tonight, everyone. Woo. But obviously they weren't quite as polished as that, shall we say, back in the day. But that's fine. That's fine. I just think that maybe so what interests me is that you have a 13-track album, whereas the previous two were 14, and this seems like the obvious song to put as track 14 to follow Money and Twist and Shout as the closer, and yet George Martin presumably looks at the songs that they've got and thinks, well, you know what, 13 songs written by Lennon and McCartney plus this cover seems a bit odd, and it's a bit more of a statement to have an entirely Lennon McCartney penned album. Let's not spoil that message with this, because of the 4 tracks that we've got, this is the one that I think this is the only one that could have gone on to a Hard Day's Night album, and to keep it in a sort of a similar vein to what they've done up till now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's definitely the only one that could really slot in. I think if it comes to it, the decision to leave it off Hard Day's Night, I think, is the right one. I think at this point, Lennon and McCartney are simply better songwriters than this. And that's not necessarily to suggest that I'm denigrating Long Tall Sally in terms of the songwriting. I'm not. It's a well-written song, and that's fine. But they're just better than this at this point. They don't need to be relying on the props of other people's material. And I know there's going to be other cover versions that we come across, but the fact of the matter is, A Hard Day's Night is a better song than this. She Loves You is a better song than this. There's just so much on that album that, just surpasses it. So yeah, not only is it better just being a straightforward Lennon McCartney album, it's just that the songwriting is better on it. And I think again that becomes more and more clear as we go through the other 3 songs as well. There's definitely none of them that could stand to be on the album, and the sense that if it was going to be Long Tall Sally that made it on, okay, fine, but yeah, it's redundant at this point.
But then there's probably also a sense that not so much that they're paying homage, but that they're I suppose paying their dues, in a sense that Little Richard I think released it in 56.
Yeah, 56.
Elvis does it 56 as well. Pat Boone in 56. Carl Perkins 58. And various other, Eddie Cochran 62 apparently. So there's almost that sense of we think that we're sort of paying homage to these people, or we think that we're up with these people, therefore we need to do the kind of songs that they do as well. So and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. You could sort of say the same applies to songs by, say, Carl Perkins, although, whether or not Matchbox would have been the one that he would have chosen.
Yes.
For example, and certainly, Larry Williams as well, the first Slow Down, that, they've had some of his songs in the back catalogue for a while, and Lennon clearly seems to be a fan. So, there's that sense, not necessarily that what we're going to do is do something fresh and original, but that we're going to do something that shows just what big fans we are of this kind of music. But it's exactly at the point where other people are starting to say, well, actually, we're massive fans of you, and we're now starting to play your songs. So maybe they just don't realise, or maybe they do, maybe they're just sort of conflicted, but it seems to me perhaps that they don't realise just how big they are, and that they are rapidly getting to the point where they have surpassed Little Richard, surpassed Chuck Berry, Carl Perkins, maybe not so much Elvis at this stage, but soon, and that they don't need to play this game anymore. But if they're having fun, they're having fun, and certainly McCartney is having fun.
No doubt about it. And I think that does also kind of bring us on to the discussion about, how much effort has been put into this EP, which is to say, not very much.
Yeah.
But, it's one of those things that, when you hear the energy and enthusiasm that this recording of Long Tall Sally pretty much manages to capture, the increasing lack of quality as we go through this EP is kind of thrown into starker relief simply by the fact that this one is the one that has the drive and the energy that you really need to capture it, whereas the other three songs in this EP simply sound knackered. And that sense that, we need product, we need product, we need product. You have to have this out. You have to have this number of albums, this number of singles. Now we're getting EPs. Like, it's the churn. So at this point, we haven't reached the stage where you think, but it's the Beatles. Of course it's going to sell. Like, it doesn't matter if you wait a few months. It'd be better to wait. But that's not the logic of the record industry in 1964. And that's really conspicuous. In fact, I think it's the most conspicuous we've seen it since we started.
So to take I think one point that's worth noting is that McDonald says that they did this in one take, and by heck, it sounds like they did it in one take. But to take a sort of a slight detour on that, the previous number one EPs, at least that the Beatles had, were basically regurgitating songs that the fans could have got somewhere else in the main. So you've got the Twist and Shout EP, Beatles hits. There's in February '64, All My Loving, which also has Ask Me Why, Money, and P.S. I Love You. So
random grab bag.
Exactly, but even here, but at least here rather, we are getting for inverted commas new songs. Later in 64 and 65, there'll be extracts from A Hard Day's Night. So they're doing something at least new in terms of the EP. So of all of those, and I think that's justification for why we haven't discussed those previous EPs. Because there isn't really anything new on it to shout about, whereas here there is. So at least if it is a cynical marketing exercise, it's not quite as cynical as some of the others, although I'm sure that they would be able to argue that releasing some of the songs in EP form was still cheaper than buying the LP. But there may well be something in that. But considering they were also a band who, in the main, didn't like to put singles on albums, putting songs from the albums on EP does seem a little bit exploitative. But shrug your shoulders, move on. So at least it is vaguely new product, and it was a vaguely new product that hit the top of the EP charts in July 1964 for a whole 7 weeks, which is fun. Sandwiched between two EPs from the Rolling Stones. which is about as much as I think you really want to go into that, because the EP charts, whilst being they're a sort of a separate and distinct thing, and they're dead by 1967, really wasn't a huge number of EPs being released, and they only ever produced a top 10. But enough about that. I think we should move on. I think Long Tall Sally is into the long grass, as it were, and we can perhaps move on. So what comes next, of course, is the one Lennon McCartney original on it. Although, of course, it's not really an original, is it? Because it's already been released as a B-side by Billy J. Kramer and his Dakotas, so it's not new in that sense either. It's new product, but not new product.
Yeah, it's also a fairly difficult song to append the word original to as well, because it's a pretty derivative piece of work. Like I said earlier on, it fits all too well into a lineup that includes Long Tall Sally, Slow Down, and Matchbox. It's a funny song. It's not one that I'm particularly. I don't mind it, but it's another one where there's just a sense that it's just like, come on, boys, bang it out and let's move on with our lives. There's not an awful lot of work which has been put into it. And again, I mean, none of the other three songs that follow Long Tall Sally would be a good choice to follow Long Tall Sally, because none of them are sort of close to that kind of quality. But there's just a sense where, like, it's okay. It's not bad. Like the middle eight is by far and away the best part of it, but it's just kind of sort of there. It's sort of fairly inconsequential, and that word might be one that I return to a number of times as we work our way through this episode. However, I promised I would say something nice about every song, and so I think it's fair to say Cowbell.
Oh, okay, fair enough. I didn't mind the guitar solo on this.
Yeah, it's not too bad. It's not too bad. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, it's slight. It's
very
clearly
slight.
Not been worked on very much, is it? The song has been around for a long time, but I think I get the feeling it was recorded because they had time in the studio. Think, well, what have we got to record? Well, let's try this one and see how it works. They record it. It doesn't really work. It's another one of those. Not quite self-loathing lyrics, but that sense of why doesn't she love me? One of Lennon's lyrics. There's some quirky change of pace in it, which I quite like, and I I like the end. The end is great, but the repetition of the line "I call your name" to that fade out, I think is pretty effective, and maybe that was just sort of like the first go at what they were sort of doing with "I'll Be Back." But it works. It's perfectly fine. But I think it's another one of those songs where it sort of shows that there wasn't a huge amount of love given to it in the studio. And it also shows, sorry folks, yeah, me again, some of the limitations of Lennon's voice at this stage. Because there's a version by the Mamas and the Papas, which actually, has kind of a slight honky-tonk feel. But it's a sign of how a song can be transformed when the vocals are clear. And I think it's Mama Cass on that who's doing the lead vocals. And she really hits those notes with a clarity that helps elevate the song. And you sort of start hearing things in it that you can't hear, I can't hear in the Lennon version, because I'm a bit worried that he's not going to hit all of those notes. Although I should say, when it comes to the harmonies on the Mamas and the Papas song, it starts to sound really, really twee. But at some stage, I'm going to have a major rant about vocal harmonies in general. It's not going to be today, folks.
Okay, well, give us something to look forward to, though.
I do think, the basic point is that I think in the main, two or more people singing roughly the same thing at the same time is not the genius that everyone makes it out to be. Crosby, Stills and Nash, I'm looking in your direction. Okay, right. So, I mean, it's perfectly fine. It's quite similar to the Billy J. Kramer and the Dakota version. It just doesn't feel like there's much enthusiasm for the Beatles to do anything with it. And it's interesting then to hear what someone can do with it when they have something like, Mama Cass to add to it that they can't.
Well, I think the fact that Lennon can't even summon up the energy to be self-pitying kind of says it all, really. Like, that's the one thing you can normally dependably rely on Lennon to be able to deliver. If those are the goods, he's backing them up to the door. But in this, there isn't even that. There isn't that much commitment. I've been extremely rude about Billy J. Kramer on this podcast in the past, and with good reason, because, their version of Do You Want to Know a Secret is absolutely dreadful. But honestly, their version of this is pretty much on a par, which is more of an insult to the Beatles than a compliment to Billy J. Kramer. But yeah, there's so little in this, and yeah, Lennon isn't summoning up much. There's just that sort of rather exhausted feeling. I do agree with you. I think the fade out is quite effective. I think that works quite well, and I like the change of rhythm into as you go into the Don't You Know I Can't Take It. Again, some like quite understated, but some really effective kind of like solid bedrock work from Ringo there. So that's quite nice. That's a good little move. But the song doesn't have like that's it. That's the one trick that this pony has.
Yeah, and I think it's a sign that they hadn't worked in it. I mean, the end of the say the opening verse, for example, that whole thing about I can't go on, it just sort of has a kind of like a attempt at showbiz razzmatazz before then going into the next section. And now it sounds very much of its time, which, as previously said, will really appeal to some people, but not necessarily to me. That's fine. They can listen to this kind of thing all they want, but the chances of me listening to this again deliberately after this is probably fairly remote, and I'm probably not going to miss it.
No, well, there's probably not that much to miss. But I mean, if the chances of you listening to this one, here comes the segue, is relatively remote, what are the chances of you ever listening to Slow Down, the next song on the EP?
Hey,
Aye, thank you.
Done. That was beautifully done.
Thank you.
Right, okay, so I've got a rabbit hole to go down with this.
All right.
Okay, and you'll like this. It's going to take us all the way into the 2000s.
Lovely.
But we'll see. I went down a bit of a Larry Williams rabbit hole actually, and that's what happened with that one. Look, interesting things to point out, that the introduction on this is about 35 seconds, which I think has got to be the longest introduction to a song yet. About 35 seconds for the vocals to come in. Can you think of any Beatles song up to this point that even comes close to that?
Nothing.
Normally it's like straight in, impact. Let's get going. I think the piano's fun on this. And I've typed on my notes here, guitar solo is perfectly fine.
The biggest compliment of all, sufficient.
Yeah, and I've also put that Lennon is making some odd sounds, which is true. But the before, I'll mention one more thing, and then see what you think before I go down my my Larry Williams rabbit hole. It sort of reminds me, and I was thinking about this because the previous episode, obviously, we talked about Hard Day's Night film quite a lot, and I think from memory. Obviously you've been doing the editing, and as of our recording it's not been released yet, so not that even when it is released I'm going to listen to it, but I feel like I've been a bit sort of harsh on Messrs. Sellers and Milligan, for example. Well, I was talking about the Running, Jumping, Standing Still film, but I was a big fan of the Goons when growing up. They were a big influence, and I'm going somewhere with this, don't worry. I don't know how much of a Goon Show listener you were, but this song reminded me of the type of song that Ray Ellington would sing on the Goon Show. The Goon Show's always had two instrumental breaks. One was Max Geldray in his harmonica, which would always be where you'd press forward wind on the cassette, and then there would be Ray Ellington singing a song which would sound something vaguely like this, and again that would be where you'd press forward on the cassette and go past it, try and time it for about 1 minute 59, 2 minutes. but the fact that it reminds me of that suggests that the playing on this is what we would refer to as, get your bingo cards out, perfunctory.
Yes.
How do you find it?
Well, I think this is effortlessly the worst song on the EP. Perfunctory seems like a compliment from what I'm going to say. It's really poor. In a way, I don't think that we've really seen before. We've had a few songs which haven't necessarily hit the sweet spot. We've had a couple that we could be certainly plenty critical about, but I don't think that we have had anything which has sounded as exhausted and effort free and just so, I don't want to use the P word, but it just exists for the sake of it. This really is just content. The little riff, the little dum dum riff is just so weightless. There's nothing to it. An unusually badly produced song, which is not like George Martin at all. But even he couldn't be arsed with this, and who could blame him? Quite frankly, it's just so slight, and it's another one of those. It's another one of those songs where you said Lennon makes some strange noises. It's a very good example of a song where just yelping isn't the same as being able to put energy into it. It's just you can't just go ow before you go, if you want our love to last. It's just, no, that's, you're not fooling anyone. Everyone sounds so exhausted. Everybody is clearly looking at the studio door. It's like, can we please just go for a pint? It's so hard to find. I know I said I would find something. I think part of the problem is, like you said, the 35-second intro, and that's by far and away the longest. I think that's absolutely true at this point. But I think also the fact that this song is almost a minute longer than everything else in the EP also just makes it feel like it drags. The other three songs are all within about 10 or 12 seconds of each other in terms of length. They're all around the kind of 2-minute mark. This is just too long, because that dum 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 riff just has no weight to it. It just makes the whole thing feel like it's going on for even longer than it is. This is just fractionally under 3 minutes. And I said all the other ones are just around the 2-minute mark. And boy, do you feel it when you're listening to it.
And this is the only one of the 4 songs that they, or at least in this case George Martin, returned to afterwards. So everyone, each of the other ones, Long Tall Sally, Call Your Name, recorded, done, dusted, 1st of March. This Matchbox, done, dusted, 1st of June. This one recorded on the 1st of June, but on the 4th of June, it looks like Martin went back and added the piano a few days later. And maybe he listened to it and thought, there's no oomph to it, and there is no oomph to it. McDonald makes the point of saying that McCartney seemingly forgot to turn his bass up, and you can imagine that would be the case. You really can't hear very much going on that, and it just sounds weak in that respect. Martin obviously thought, I need to boost this. I know what I'll do. Let's whack some piano on. That's fine. Let's get Lennon to put some double track vocal on. But I was looking at doing some research on this, and the BeatlesBooks.com website has some very interesting details on there about the recording of this song, and it talks about the fact that Lennon's double tracking was so slack that even at one point in it, not only is he sort of singing, he's actually harmonising with himself because he doesn't get the notes right, but he even changes some of the words at one point as well. And it says quite a lot that I didn't listen closely enough to work out exactly where that was, which says something about the song, maybe something about me as well. But it's one of those things that I think it shows the limitations of modern crowdsourcing website software, that according to setlist.fm, it was only played live once by the Beatles, and that was at the Paris Theatre, London, 1963, which suggests it was a BBC recording. But MacDonald refers to it having been a regular in the act from 60 to 62, but they'd not been near it. So there's some of that surprise that they were recording it at all, because they'd not been near the song for well over a year. And it shows.
It really does show. It really does. So, in my quest to try and find something nice to say about this song, I haven't actually found anything. So that's a bit of a problem. Yeah, I mean, you can really tell that there's. I think it's a confidence thing in a way, and that might well be the fact that they haven't played it for a very long time. There's a lack of commitment to it. Like "I Call Your Name" isn't a great song, but you know, like they're doing it, and Long Tall Sally has plenty of commitment to it. That's not the one thing. That is the one thing it's not lacking. But even Ringo's cymbals on this, it just sounds like static. It sounds like a detuned radio, you know. It's that's how bad the production is, and like George Martin listening to it and thinking, oh, I'll go back and add a piano to it because it's insubstantial. Now it's insubstantial, but also with a piano on it. It doesn't actually add anything, and like it's so like even George Martin can't quite pull this one out of the bag. That's how bad this is.
That's me guessing his motivation.
No, I mean, well,
I'm pretty sure I'm right.
I'm pretty sure you're right. So let's take that as a fair guess because otherwise, you know, it would probably have been done there and then. But yeah, there's nothing to this. So yeah, sure, stick a piano on it. Yeah, there's still nothing to it, but now also there's a piano. It's not great. But come on, give us your Larry Williams rabbit hole.
Well, okay, so
I've got nothing else to say about the song.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's quite interesting. I mean, there's some interesting information in Bob Stanley's Yeah about it. Says he had an ice cream bouffon, which is a lovely description, and wrote character sketches, and that's sort of coming back to a previous point. Oral cartoon strips about girls like Boney Maroney, who quote was as skinny as a stick of macaroni. Dizzy Miss Lizzie, which is the more famous one, and Short Fat Fanny. Okay, so
less well known these days for some reason.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and Stanley does say that the plan was that he would sort of be the new Little Richard. He was groomed to be the new Little Richard. He had a reasonably long career, but you know, he seemed to be turn out to be a bit of a hustler though. Going to quote Bob Stanley here for legal reasons. He was a pimp and a drug dealer, and allegedly once pulled a gun on Richard over a debt, which I think was in 1977. So you know, quite a way in that respect. But I sort of focused in on these on some of these titles with, like, you know, Dizzy Miss Lizzie, Boney Maroney, because Boney Maroney comes up elsewhere. In Wilson Pickett's Land of a Thousand Dances, which is just the most amazing song and completely makes me look like a hypocrite, bearing in mind what I was talking about earlier. If dear listener, you do know A Land of a Thousand Dances, you may not know it from the title, but it is just absolutely awesome. So we've got two separate songs that are referring to this character of Boney Maroney, presumably because of that sort of, you know, half rhyme in there. It sort of seems to be something that trips off the tongue. Boney Maroney crops up, and in order to demonstrate his love of Larry Williams, it crops up on side 2 of Lennon's Rock and Roll in the 70s. But
not a great album.
No, it's a bit difficult to say that it's a tribute to all of his influences, bearing in mind some people like it. Okay, let's leave it. And people will go, oh, well, Stand By Me was really good, therefore the rest of it must be good. That's what they want to think. That's perfectly fine. One thing that I put down here is that actually, to me, the song sounds like it could have been an influence on the early Beach Boys. It sort of has that feel in terms of the way it's written. But it also, to me, sounds a lot like Summertime Blues. I mean, we're talking about Boney Maroney here. Boney Maroney, here's where we go into the deep dive. Referenced by Patti Smith and on Horses in the song Land. And if I then was to sort of bring you forward nearly 20 years and say the lyrics, I'll be Pounce Pony, Phony Maroney to you, that should sort of set a little trigger in the back of your REM fanboy brain.
It obviously falls to climb, of course. Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Which I have to say is absolutely stunning and overlooked song in the REM back catalogue.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree
more. I was
more.
going to say, I'll brook no argument about that. I absolutely love that. So I don't know whether or not Michael Stipe was referencing Patti Smith.
Most likely.
Quite possibly, but there is that sort of line that's going through it. But actually, if you look up the lyrics to Land of a Thousand Dances, you'll find that actually there is a little bit of similarity in there as well. I'm just going to sort of do live Googling, folks. Bear with me. Land of a Thousand Dances, lyrics. I thought I put this in my Google Doc, but I hadn't. Because in the first verse, it goes, got to know how pony like Boney Maroney. Okay. So actually, he seems to be drawing on a lot more rock and roll history than Michael Stipe is actually famous for really doing. So just sort of a little kind of sort of sense of some of the influence of Larry Williams there, which I think is worth knowing. And therefore, it's such a shame that what we get is Slow Down. There is apparently, sort of suggestion that at some point the Beatles did record Boney Maroney, or at least used to play it, but I don't know if that actually exists or whether that's, maybe stuck in a shoebox somewhere in the Dakota building, like lots of other things that possibly some people might argue should stay in a shoebox in the Dakota building, but not me. Good. I'm very much looking forward to all that shoebox can bring.
Excellent. I'm glad we've cleared up the shoebox point. Yeah, that's all really interesting. What a shame, as you say, that the grand sum total of it is this piece of shit. That's a bit of a shame. I still haven't thought of anything nice to say about it. We don't have to talk about it anymore. Does that count?
No,
can we move on?
Well, your big target, bear in mind the last episode was an hour and a half, was maybe 5 minutes on each song. And we've hit about 45 minutes.
Yeah, we're doing all right.
So what that does mean is that we can actually be really, really brief about Matchbox, which is fine. But then Matchbox allows me to make reference to Tug of War.
Okay,
so
well, we're going to have to go with it. Yeah, no.
What I'm going to do.
We always love a Tug of War reference in this podcast. We're a very pro Tug of War podcast. But yeah, Matchbox is a bit of a weird one. It's not good by any conventional standards. Sorry, everyone. But at the same time, I definitely prefer it over Slow Down, and I might prefer it over I Call Your Name. I like to hear Ringo do things that isn't just cod country and western. So it's quite nice to hear him doing something which is a bit kind of more kind of rhythm and blues, a bit more rockabilly, and his voice is quite well suited to it. It's a very flat vocal performance. There's not a lot of, bless him, it's a Ringo vocal. There's not a lot of range to it, but I quite like the way that it's delivered, and I really like the way that his voice is produced on it. It's a double vocal with the main vocal at front, and then the secondary vocal pulled back slightly with some reverb on it. That's quite a nice effect. That works quite well with his voice, and it's quite unusual. Normally his voice is produced quite dry, but this is got that little reverb there. It's quite nice, and the instrumentation is all very. I don't know if it feels like it's been stuck through a compressor or a limiter or something, but it's almost oppressive. And again, that's quite an unusual characteristic to get, like Ringo tends to get like the light songs, like Act Naturally or all that kind of stuff. It's, it tends to, even Boys, I suppose. But it's unusual to have him in that kind of role. So I quite, like, even if it's not necessarily a great song in and of itself, which it isn't, it's quite nice to see at least Ringo being pushed in a direction that we don't often get him to. We don't often get to see him be in. So that's my nice thing about Matchbox.
Well, bearing in mind one of the key considerations is whether or not a matchbox will hold my clothes. I think one of the questions I've got is, what size of matchbox are we talking about here?
Well, what size of person are we talking about here?
Well, I'm more interested in the size of the matchbox.
Fair enough.
And will let me be your little dog till your big dog comes. It's fine. It's fun. They clearly had fun. We know, don't we, that George Harrison in particular was a big fan of Carl Perkins.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so there's that affection there. And of course, Carl Perkins was in town And maybe they specifically recorded this because they invited them along to the studio, or whether there was some sort of coincidence there, I don't know. But it almost feels a little bit like it's motivation. Um, but it just feels to me like the epitome of what the Beatles had started to leave behind with A Hard Day's Night. And it doesn't sound great compared to other songs on the EP, let alone other Beatles covers. So maybe they had fun in the studio. Maybe Carl Perkins had a great time, but it doesn't amount to anything substantial. And it's just, you can sort of look at a whole history of popular music where someone has got together with a hero and produced a song, and you sort of think, okay, well, that's great, that might be quite interesting to have a listen to. And it actually turns out that it isn't. It's fine. It's just people who are successful, who like each other, like each other's music, getting together, having a bit of fun, and then releasing it for us to join in the rollicking fun. And they had fun, and I'm very happy for them. And that's where we go. And of course, Tug of War works because, of course, you've got McCartney and Carl Perkins doing "Gotta Get It," and you gotta get it good, which again is fun. It's not particularly substantial, and I don't think it's intended to be substantial, but it is, again, to use another JG-ism. It's a thing that happened, and we were grateful for the fact that it happened, and the people involved had a great time, and that we can share in them having a great time. There you go.
Well,
Is that positive enough for you?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Excellent work, good stuff. I rather like "Gotta Get It." I think it's a rather good song. But it's a Carl Perkins pastiche with Carl Perkins on it. It's a curious choice in 1982, but fine. It works well, and it definitely does work better than Matchbox, where there is a sense that the fun doesn't quite make it past the speaker grill. It's nice that everyone enjoyed it, but yeah, for all the nice things that I was trying to say before, it's a pretty insubstantial piece of work all around. But again, unlike the predecessor in the EP, it doesn't hang around. It does its 2 minutes and it buggers off again, and that's okay. Fine, that's okay. And if it was any longer, I think it would rapidly become insufferable.
I suppose the only other question to ask about it is one that we did pose on the previous episode. Is we've said that Long Tall Sally seems to be the best fit of the four in terms of what could go on Hard Day's Night, because it would be a natural closer. Of course, this gives us a Ringo vocal, and that's the one thing that is missing from A Hard Day's Night. But it's difficult to make a case that this Ringo vocal ought to be on the album.
Oh no, I would never make that case. Definitely not. No. I know that when we were talking about the album, I said that like Ringo's vocal might not be on Hard Day's Night, but he's he's really the MVP of that album. He's astonishingly good on A Hard Day's Night. But this, I guess, this is the flip side. We get the vocal here. It probably wasn't up to scratch. That's fine. It all worked out for the best.
Absolutely. Yeah. That seems like a decent place to maybe draw a veil over this, because I sure as heck haven't got anything to add to that wonderful way of finishing.
Excellent, lovely. Well, we're really going out on a high, or are we? Because we do still have to give these songs a score, and the EP a score as well. Oh, yes, we do, sir. Yes, we do. So let's just quickly run through them in sequence. So, Long Tall Sally.
I think that's going to be the best of the bunch, which I'm going to give a 5 to.
5. Okay, I'm going to give Long Tall Sally a 6. I don't know why. I Call Your Name.
It's 3s for the rest for me. But then partly that is in line with some reevaluation of some of the previous scores that I'm going to give. So it seems like it's drastically lower than a lot. But I am going to pull some of those previous scores down at a later stage. But yeah, 3 seems fair considering the amount of effort that's gone into them.
Okay, fair enough. So 3, and a 3. I'm going to give I Call Your Name 4. I'll give Slow Down 2, and I feel like I'm being quite generous there. And Matchbox 3. Okay, good. Long Tall Sally EP overall.
let's average out at 3.333. Oh no, let's go for a very generous 4.
Four.
Let's do 4.
Okay, that does sound generous. All right, well, we've done it. We have managed to stagger our way through the Long Tall Sally EP. Any final thoughts?
No. Well, actually, yes. Because as we may have mentioned, I know if you follow me on Twitter as well, I've mentioned this as well. So I had an illness recently, and what that's meant is that my plans of visiting some Beatles sites in New York on the summer trip have been kiboshed. So instead, we're going to southern North Wales, if that makes sense. And actually, I've sort of started looking up some interesting places to go that have Beatles connections. So I'm going to be going to places like Harlock and Portmeirion anyway, maybe even Bangor. And so yeah, I'm going to start doing a bit of Beatles tourism for my sins, which will be a bit fun. So that's something to look out for. And I'm sure, as you'll say, you'll refer to in a minute, at some point, maybe in early August, I will be blogging some embarrassing pictures of standing somewhere where George Harrison once did an interview for Anthology and things like that.
Well, that sounds delightful. We'll look forward to your trip updates. That'll be
fanboy.
brilliant additional content for which we will all be extremely grateful. Right, lovely. Let's end this nonsense now. Okay, you can really get a hold of us. We can be contacted by email. We are BeatlesStuffology@gmail.com. We are on Twitter @Beatles_ology, and you can find my blog about music, TV, popular culture, just whatever the hell I feel like writing about at www.jgmcquarrie.scot. And as Andrew mentioned, you can find his writing at www.stuffology.co.uk. Also, please check out my other podcast because we really, really need listeners. It's Talking Trek to You, where a noob and an expert, which is me, go through the original Star Trek series episode by episode. Please like, rate, and review us on whatever podcatcher you are using so that more people can find the show. Next episode, we'll be moving into singles territory, which means we are going to be talking about I Feel Fine. And as always, we hope you're going to join us for it. But until then, keep listening.